Welcome one and all to this, the night session of the Winter Warmer Festival, Friday. And we have an amazing set for you of some really exceptional poets, I think, award-winning, each of them in their own right. Thank you, Rab. That's Rab, our technical guy. Where would we be without him? So also to say thank you for everybody that's in the room. It's great to have an audience. I realize these are tricky times and everybody's a little bit extra paranoid because things are kicking off again. So thank you for being here in the room with us. And especially thank you, poets, for joining us through Zoom. We've got 3 continents coming together tonight. South Africa with Gabeba Baderoon, James Cagney coming from California, and Victoria Kennefick from up the road in County Kerry. So she's a Cork woman and we won't let them claim her for love or money. So without further ado, I shall introduce the poets one by one before you read. And we're going to start with Gabeba Baderoon, followed by James Cagney, and then finally we will have Victoria Kennefick. So, Gabeba Baderoon is an award-winning South African poet. She is a scholar and also on the editorial board of the African Poetry Book Fund. Anyway, food for thought, I suppose. And she's the author of 3 collections: The Dream of the Next Body from 2005, 100 Silences from 2006, and The History of Intimacy from 2018, all published by Kwela Press. She has received numerous prizes: the Daimler Prize for South African Poetry, the Elisabeth Eybers Prize, and the University of Johannesburg Prize for South African Poetry also. And she also holds 2 Best Poetry Book Awards from the National Institute of Social Sciences. So please make a very warm welcome for Gabeba Baderoon.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the lovers of poetry of the festival and of the audience and my fellow writers for gathering in this winter dreariness to indeed lighten the afternoon. I'm very, very honoured to be part of the Winter Warmer Festival, and my gratitude again for the invitation. I'll read to you a little bit from each of the books that was mentioned, and I'll start with The History of Intimacy because it has a poem called Poetry for Beginners. And I love the theme of beginnings and endings and middles, always ending on a middle. So that's what I'll share with you. Poetry for Beginners. In the evening poetry class for beginners, a girl in a thick brown coat she doesn't take off, breathes in deep and risking something says fast, "My boyfriend's in prison. I'm here to find out how to write to him through the bars." And someone laughs. And she pulls herself back into her coat and from inside looks past us, and the next week doesn't come back. And I think of her for years and what poetry is. I think this is my origin, where poetry is risk, is betrayal, and the memory of the first question, how not to be alone. I want to switch to another book now called 100 Silences and read you a poem about a beginning in a different way, which is a poem dedicated to my father, and who used to be a fisherman as one of his hobbies. And this is a poem written about that memory. Give, Before dawn, low voices briefly loud. My father and his friend, the ambulance driver, his days off, always in the middle of the week, drive away from the house with thick sandwiches and a flask of tea, and my father's green and white fishing rod whipping the wind behind the 76 Corolla. Camping by the sea, we'd see him take his rod further down the beach, walk waist deep into the water, plant himself with legs apart in the breakers, reach back, cast the line baited with choker, and pull, giving, then tightening the line, nudging its weighted stream of gut to the fish. But in this place on the West Coast, they never disclosed. They stand unwatched, out of reach of each other's lines, and at their backs, a fire on the beach, not stemming the dark, but deepening it. Often it would come to nothing, their planting and pulling. But sometimes the leather cups holding the ends of their fishing rods strained as they bent back against the high howl of the reels being run to the limit, and holding, bowing forward and giving, and leaning back and pulling, their bodies make a slow dance nobody sees. And at home, the scraping of scales from halyun and yellowtail, and slitting the silver slick of skin to make thick steaks for supper, setting aside the cater for breakfast, the head for soup, and the gills and fat for the cats, while they tell us how they landed them. I wonder about the empty days, more frequent, the solitary standing in the dark at the edge of something vast, sea and sky, throwing a thin line into the give of it, and waiting, silent and waiting, until something pulls against your weight. Having read a poem for my father, I must, of course, read a poem for my mother. I will tell you a little bit about her. She's extremely short, and my father was extremely tall. And whenever they appeared and people introduced Dr. Jardine and spouse, and they always went up to introduce themselves to my father, and my mother said, "Actually, I'm Dr. Jardine." And she loved to play that trick on people. And she became a doctor at a time when most women didn't study. Most working class women certainly had no chance of studying, and most Black people had no chance of studying medicine. But she did all of those things as a working class Black woman in South Africa in the 1950s. And she would tell me stories about what it was like to be at the same university I eventually went to, the University of Cape Town, 30 years later. But I didn't really grasp what she was telling me. I didn't understand what it meant to experience what she did. And years later, I think I started to understand. And I wrote this poem as a way to think through and experience what she experienced. This poem is called I Forget to Look. The photograph of my mother at her desk in the 50s has been in my purse for 20 years. Its paper faded, browning, the scalloped edge bent, then straightened. The color of her dress folds discreetly. The angle of her neck looks as though someone has called her from far away. She was the first in her family to take the bus from Claremont up the hill to the university. At one point during the lectures at medical school, Black students had to pack their notes, get up, and walk past the ascending rows of desks out of the theatre. Behind the closed door, in an autopsy Black students were not meant to see, the uncovering and cutting of white skin. Under the knife, the skin, the mystery of sameness. In a world that defined how black and white could look at each other, touch each other, my mother looks back, her poise unmarred. Every time I open my purse, she is there, so familiar, I forget to look at her. My tiny mother. Turns out, though I lived in the same house and practically in the same room for 28 years, that I suddenly made a very big move and I started to travel a lot. And partly it was poetry that gave me a vagabond life for about 3 years, where I would accept fellowship after fellowship. And perhaps some of you know that experience suddenly of becoming a German for 3 weeks, becoming an Italian for 6 weeks. Well, I had to learn how to navigate borders, of course. And this very short poem is about that. I cannot myself. To come to this country, my body must assemble itself into photographs and signatures. Among them, they will search for me. I must leave behind all uncertainties. I cannot myself be a question. So, incredibly human feeling of sudden guilt that overcomes one when you have to present your documents to an official is not possible for somebody who actually is a question. So you have to not have any doubts and uncertainties at all. So the next poem I'm going to read actually features this painting, which was painted by my father-in-law and is my favorite painting in the entire world. And it features this painting and also an ode to housework. The dream in the next body. From the end of the bed, I pull the sheets back into place. An old man paints a large sun striped by clouds of 7 blues. Across the yellow center, each blue is precisely itself, and yet, at the point it meets another, the eye cannot detect a change. The air shifts, he says, and the colors. When you touched me in a dream, your skin an hour ago did not end where it joined mine. My body continued the movement of yours. Something flowed between us like birds in a flock. In a solitude larger than our 2 bodies, the hardening light parted us again. But under the covering, the impress of our bodies is a single, warm hollow. Proving that poetry comes directly from chores. Having introduced the theme of love, I shall read you a poem about, I don't quite know which stage of love it is, the beginning, the middle, or the end. I'll let you decide. Old photographs. On my desk is a photograph of you, taken by the woman who loved you then. In some photos, her shadow falls in the foreground. In this one, her body is not that far from yours. Did you hold your head that way because she loved it? She is not invisible, not my enemy, nor even the past. I think I love the things she loved. Of all your old photographs, I wanted this one for its becoming. I think you were starting to turn your head a little, your eyes looking slightly to the side. Was this the beginning of leaving? I'm going back to the new one, the history of intimacy. I have a couple of requests from people, so I'm going to read two poems as a result of that. I'll tell you a little bit about them. I'm from the city of Cape Town, which is, you've probably heard it, one of the most beautiful places in the world. And when you arrive in Cape Town, that is what you see. But what you might not see immediately is that, in fact, it is a city built on 178 years of slavery, which is not something people know about South Africa. We know about apartheid in South Africa. We know what happened after apartheid, but we don't know that before apartheid, during the period of colonialism, there was 178 years of slavery. And there's a way in which you can see the traces of this terrible history on the landscape itself. And I'm going to read you one of the poems that I wrote about growing up in this landscape and as a descendant of enslaved people. The poem is called Kochelbaai, and it is a bay along the peninsula, along a really beautiful curve called False Bay. And it's where my family and I went camping as children. It was the area where Black people could camp. Kochelbaai. Carrying our green canvas tents, darned and patched after 30 years of camping down the mountain at Kochelbaai, we passed the ghosts my uncle saw. After the children fell asleep on the goodry padded ground, he told my brother late at night stories of the wraiths of slaves who crossed the mountain 2 centuries ago and are still hiding. Born with a helm, he learned after his early terror not to open his mouth lightly, but to look through the door of time and see when the mountain was the steep route of escape, and how they disappeared into the kloof, barely eating and keeping one another alive, and still do. Tell us ghost stories, we children said, but he shook his head, a shadow himself, and made a joke, his voice tapering off. Another of the requests is a very, very short one. It's called Black Butterflies, and it describes a phenomenon that I found on a morning hike in a place called Silvermine, which is just outside of the city of Cape Town. Black butterflies. On the morning walk at Silvermine, trees are black lace against the sky. At our knees, hinged silhouettes flicker free of each other, shadows of shadows, doubled half circles fluttering like fragments of midnight to our feet, then rising again. I think I've come to almost the last of my set, and I'll read you a couple, 3 more poems. And the first of these will be The Law of the Mother, which again, of course, as you can imagine, is inspired by my own beginning point. The Law of the Mother. You and your sisters ask your mother if it hurts on your wedding night when your hymen is broken. And she answers, it's a membrane and it doesn't break, just gets nudged aside. And it doesn't hurt if you're gentle with each other and take your time. On hearing this, we are puzzled because everyone tells you the breaking is the sign of a good woman. But you grasp that she has told you the law of the mother. One day when you are 5, a boy in the neighborhood says, "Let's play Mummy and Daddy." And when it hurts, he warns you not to say anything to your parents. And you tell your father, and the world fissures. And who do you turn to then? To shame, an internal script you learned before the sin and rehearse again and again. Virgin, fallen. You are sentenced to your body, your bitter body, your memory. For months you forget, then in the middle of class, shame jolts through every vein in your body, driving the breath from you. This becomes such a pattern, you realize the aftermath of hurt is its own form. Sex is both impossible and the only way to be modern. How can you be a Muslim feminist when you're a virgin? No, when you're lying about sex to your friends. One night, talking with your sisters in the dark, you vow, if anyone ever hurts you, come tell me, and I promise I'll stand with you. And as you say this, the scene where Thelma works out why Louise left Texas and never went back replays in your mind, and you understand for the first time, it happened to you too, didn't it? And even on the desperate race from the police to freedom in Mexico, Louise refuses to drive the direct route through Texas, to go back there and let any part of it touch her again. You think therapy is for white people, till you confide in a lecturer who wrote about rape, and she tells you to come back, and you do for an hour each Friday for a year, till you ask with a ragged throat, if everything you are was born of that breaking, is a subset of breaking, is broken. She, deep-souled lesbian woman, tells you that broken is a boundary, and the body is time as well as place. And with this, you permit yourself to return to what happened, to where you shed your bones and flesh, and self threads into its casing, enters again each knot and hollow. Now I'll read the title poem of this book, and it contains 6 parts in which I do some voices because I quite like the drama of doing voices. And you'll hear something like the Group Areas Act, which was the act under apartheid that decreed that Black people and white people and other categories that the apartheid government invented, we actually had to live in separate areas. And where there were areas where people did live together, the Black people were removed. So there's this word removal. My mother in the 1960s was of that generation which was removed. And I was the generation that lived in the aftermath of removal, always with a ghost of a house haunting the house we lived in. The history of intimacy. 1, you remember it because it's a wound, a cut, 20 cuts, the name for canings on the palm, on the knuckles, on the buttocks, a finely graded order of pain that we, who should not exist, were assigned for our failures. 2, you keep you whitener, Mike shouts in 1987 across the heads of students sitting on Jamison steps. And the sudden pale silence shows we are no longer in uniform in the quad at Livingston High, teasing, hey, why did you look through me as though I don't exist? And this slipping from being we called keeping you white. But saying it out loud reveals how we have learned to measure our existence. 3, in the video store after I've ordered a film, my cousin elbows me. Why are you putting on? Putting on. Transitive verb. Putting on what? Putting on skin. Putting on not nothingness. 4, when the Group Areas Act is abolished, my mother aches to go back to the street she was removed from, and it is we, grown attached to the scar we call home, who say, no, we don't want to live in a white area. This time, ceding it ourselves. 5. Mother, how do I write about you? As a medical student on night duty, you learned to sleep so lightly you could wake in an instant in an emergency. And for the rest of your life, your body became a body that never again could sleep through the night. You told of one evening when, for some reason a little irked with my father, you left the table early, returning to the bedroom by yourself, and found my sister blue for lack of breath. To this day, you recall what anger gave you, how it saved my sister's life. Anger, breath. Since the beginning, you have been breath and poetry. You told me how Black students were asked to leave the room during the autopsy of white bodies. And of my writing about this, you said, that is my story. That is not your story. And now, with the illness you could not speak of for years, Mother, am I once again turning your words and your silence into a poem? 6. In 1988 at Crawford train station, my brother and I find a blue plank hand-painted in yellow letters, non-whites only on one side, whites only on the other, thrown away by the fence next to the tracks. Picking it up, we see the two sides of the sign lay back to back, each half resting against its opposite, intimate and in verse, but unknown to each other. We knew this was history someone had made by hand, then hidden and tried to forget. We bring it home and come across it sometimes in a corner when we're looking for something else. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabeba. That was a stunning reading, beautiful. Made me notice I was a little nervous kicking off this set. And you're also amazing. I guess I felt a little intimidated. But just to say that your calm delivery and heartfelt words have helped to settle me. So thank you, sincerely. Next up, we have James Cagney, who is with us from Zoom and in Oakland at the moment in California. So I think it's about 1 o'clock in the day there. And so yeah, enjoy your lunch. We're kicking off into the night. And James, his first collection, Black Steel Magnolias in the Hour of Chaos Theory, won the Josephine Miles Award from Pen Oakland. And his second collection, which is soon to be published, Martian, The Saint of Loneliness, has won the 2021 James Laughlin Award from the Academy of American Poetry. So I think it's fair to say we're in very safe hands with James Cagney. Thank you for being with us again, and yeah, the stage is yours.
Oh yeah, I am muted. Oh, there we go. That was just a trial run. It is an incredible honor to be here with you and to read with these fabulous poets for the Winter Warmer Festival. And I could not be more delighted and honored to share some work. I'd like to start with a relatively new poem, and I will read many poems from the new book. This first poem is my warm-up. It is called Untied. The tongue as knife, as grenade. The tongue as pilot light to volcano. The tongue as butterfly shrapnel spraying radioactive glass. The tongue as battering ram, axe handle, desecrated cross, trigger. The tongue as begging puppy, as monster truck. The tongue Russian necktied behind a joke. The tongue as assassin, a ninja jangling with blades, cross-stepping the grassy knoll. The tongue as wooden stake, silver bullet, an earthquake with lightning in its hair. The tongue begging kryptonite to freebase. The tongue as apple and serpent, rolling its jellied eggs into the ear. The tongue loaded and unlicensed, steaming with cordite, trying to finish something that never should have started. The tongue, having kissed every wound from inside out, is jealous of bone. The tongue has heard of the heart, but doesn't believe in it, prefers the pulse in dice. The tongue as a wall, a trench, a gate, fool's gold in moonlight. The tongue tied into a straitjacket, scatting. The tongue, a lead weight dropped onto a garden of peonies, a nest of starlings. The tongue, misfired, misplaced, misspoke in our last conversation. The tongue, armed, blows a hole through its nearest cheek. The tongue, thorny and uphill, single-bladed and double-barreled. The tongue as museum, snowing through autumn. The tongue gets it. Yes, yes, yes. But how it loves spitting no. This is my book, Black Steel Magnolias in the Hour of Chaos Theory. It's available on nomadicpress.org. And I'm going to read several poems from that collection. And I'm going to start with a piece called Identity to Burn. When I was a child, I was adopted. And I wasn't adopted through an orphanage or a program. It was actually an agreement between adults. And this kind of goes into that story. This was written when I was about 30 years old, after the parents who raised me had basically died. I ended up meeting and integrating myself into the lives of my biological family. And during that time period, I went to school, took a writing class, and struggling over homework, one of my older sisters came into the room that I was using, and she was like, "Boy, what are you in here doing?" I told her I'd been given this assignment to write a poem about identity. And when she left my room a few minutes later, I wrote this transcript of what had just occurred. This is called Identity to Burn. "You have to write a poem about identity," she says. "Well, when is you going to write about me? When is you going to write about your favorite sister? I know I've given you enough material by now. Look," she says, "you got enough identity for the whole class. There may not be enough time for anybody else to speak." "Identity," she says. "This is going to be the easiest poem you ever wrote. Let's see. Tell them how your family tree wasn't what you thought it was. Tell them about how you was an only child and at 19 found out you was adopted and suddenly had this whole new identity. Tell them about how your mama had 7 kids to raise on one check, so she gave you to another family so you'd have a better chance at life. Now, they was really too old to have kids, but you don't have to say that. You could say how your mama befriended your birth mama while she was in beauty school. Miss Cagney was her instructor, huh? Yeah, tell them that. Tell them you didn't know about us, your real family. You just thought you was all alone in this world after your daddy died, your mama died. Tell them about how Medi-Cal did you a number and you became homeless, and your other family said, well, drop us a postcard every now and then, baby James. Let us know how you're doing. Let us know you're all right. Tell them about how you were born when? In 68 and reborn in 1999, adopted back into the family you were adopted out of. Now, you don't have to tell them about your love life. I'm saving up to get you a good piece for your birthday. And don't tell them about your brother that's been institutionalized or your cousin with the plate in his head who drank himself to death after your mama passed. Shoot, can I get credit for this poem too? I mean, look at you, so much has happened. You got two whole identities, two families, two mamas, one of them's gone now, but you know, I mean, boy, you rolling. You got identity to burn. You can knock this poem out in a few minutes, throw some rhymes in there, it'll be all good. And then you can start writing about something important. You can start writing about me. Because I can't see how you made it all these years without me. And I can't imagine why you're having problems writing about identity. This piece is has a form of the blues, actually, and this is called Bad Luck John. Mama laid me cross a log, let the river carry me down. Mama laid me cross a felled log and let the river carry me down. I'm going back to that river where my mama let me drown. Daddy's seed was hot as brandy. I was sprouted on a bed of shame. Daddy's seed burned like brandy. I was made in quiet shame. Mama hated what waited in her belly. The Lord never knew my name. Swaddled in Bible leaves, the deacon told me to pray. Deacon Murray fed me Bible leaves, told me I got to pray. Holy water caught fire and his church melted away. I am Bad Luck John. Devil, kneel on one knee. Call me Bad Luck John. Devil, get down on one knee. God won't spit my name and Satan prays to me. Many years ago, a poet writer friend of mine asked me as a prompt, whatever became of the child that you once were? Is that child still vibrant and thriving within you, or is that child matured and moved on? This was my answer, and this is called Incubators of the Damned. Was there ever a child here, conceived by loneliness and blue booze, when the love was lost to us, brewed in the awful solitary of a motel womb, growing like a weed on the white tongue of an alcoholic's promise? Was there ever a child here for these hand-me-downs of neuroses who understood our need for whiskey, for madness, who understood our need for a God to cuss and pray to in equal measure? Was there ever a child here in the seam between recipe and memory, collaged from the spare parts of whipped ancestors, hitchhiking on Texas highways with open wound sunsets, riding shotgun, strolling hungry along riverbanks, moaning their philosophy of flies, masturbating in the unique silence of a loveless house? But this child. When does life begin? To whom does life belong? When does a mother have the right to say no? Whose child is this? Who claims this child? Was there ever a child here to take care of us as we awoke, saluting death from our throats, praying to true blackness in colored ribbons of mucus, long as choir robes, stranded on warmed schoolyard benches where even kids ridiculed for being poor dare not approach, printed on cartons recalled for undrinkable milk, squirming and kicking in an unclaimed crib, no number, placed here alone as if by miracle. I dedicate this next poem to my father, the father that raised me and for whom I get my name, and my cousin, John Edward. This poem is called Negro Geist. 1, Daddy. Old Crow and Jack Daniels understood my father mouthfuls at a time. Jim Beam and Old Forrester were uncles in hard glass suits, They'd roll up in the knuckle crack and sigh of Hennessy taking its first breath, then hound dog laughter and dominoes falling in hail on the graveyard of the dining room table. Relatives who existed only through stories and memory would ease in like zombies on ropes of blue Marlboro and Newport and Camel Smoke, then demand a seance in spades, coon can, and Texas Hold'em. No wonder they called it spirits. Spirits baited my father with Courvoisier, snatching him out of his body like a river catfish, and he'd vanish like that. Spirits made him burn rubber scream in the driveway, stand on my bed a sloppy marionette, and speak in tongues, or just toss pans and skillets at midnight. I wouldn't see his ass again until the next afternoon, looking like something had chewed all the sugar out of him and spit the gray pulp on the couch. 2. Johnny. My cousin Johnny volunteered for possession every week. Spirits lit that nigga up like Vesuvius. He was certified. Electroshock exorcisms did nothing. Empty bottles and cans were his weekend storm warning. Old English, Colt 45, Crazy Horse, Cisco, they'd demand sacrifices in blood, so bottles of Haldol and Thorazine would dice roll under the couch Friday nights. Then doors slam to splinters, tables get flipped, walls kicked until straitjackets lay waiting on the lawn. Mama would cite visions of gang boys with tire iron erections and Johnny's convertible skull with its metal vent as if it explained anything. It did not. Between dusk Friday and dawn Saturday, he'd still be ready to blow this motherfucker up. Do you want some of this? Do you want some of this? Oh no, oh yes, oh no, oh yes. I'll be damned, I'll be damned, I'll be damned. This piece is called Compare Your Childhood to How Your Father Handled Catfish. 1. Night digging with shovels of light. The aroused orgy of earthworms churn in the black cake flesh beneath my father's benediction of beer. A wholly transformative act offered these creatures, busy stretch crawling through our fingers like drunks rolling home. 2. Tolerate the brisk flies munching your ears at the river. The dervish ecstasies of their black seed bodies stumbling through the air. Their hot electric praise song psalm for the spiked jewelry of the river. Holy Ghost dancing in my father's palm like a fresh-bathed infant and shining like Reno money. 3. Toss the river's perfumed bounty into an igloo cooler, a crib for purgatory's eggless black sperm to run infinite loops until dizzy and confused. The mad gasping of the largest one, smooth as a boxer's bicep, paraded through a witness of neighborhood drunks as if prom king. How they all tearfully confess their preference for Old Crow over blessed water. How every living thing is saved and baited by sin and tossed into the tanks of hell. 4. Hold down the leathery armored samurai, delirious with color, swatting away sunlight with its church fantail. Peel the skin down like stockings for the buttery musculature beneath. Its cologne close to rain. Click open the coin purse of its belly. Boil a bath of baby oil while dusting the baby in a vestment of spices. Align a plate with the wet gold leaves of their palm-hot bodies. Open your mouth as if to say grace, but say nothing. Actually, I rarely ever read this. This was an email that I got from my biological mother one year, and I converted this into a poem. So this is called Ray, The Other Boy, or read The Other Boy. I cried today because I was sad, but also unhappy because I missed so much. You do not always get a chance to make up time. Even so, God has been good. I hope you are fine. Did you get another girl yet? Try and try again. She's out there waiting on her some James. I don't know. I got 5 boys and 4 of them is single. I think I will open a marriage shop. You know, when I was young, I used to write poems. So you are an apple. Wish I'd saved them. I tried to write a book, but I have trouble with my hands and can hardly type anyways. There's too much water under the bridge to keep track of every drop. I would like to get another letter from you sometime when you feel like it. Do you ever see that young lady anymore, or did that one go on out yonder? I sometimes look back on my life, not you, and wonder, what if I had married the other boy? What would be different? You know, I loved your dad and treated him well in spite of the way things were, but I loved the other boy too, and differently. And one time after your dad died, we got together. We went to a motel in his town. He was still with his wife. It's maybe hard for people to believe, but it was for no other reason than to talk. We talked most of the night. He told me how he left home when we were teens and returned after I graduated high school, thinking I was still available, but I was married to your dad then. He said, we cannot live in the same town now. I am leaving here never to return. And all them years, his mom never told me where he went. But that's history. I would not mess with his life now. And we were too old to have had an affair. That would have been awful. So that night, we just stayed in that motel for hours. We could not figure anything out. Now you know a secret about your mom no one else knows. Isn't that funny? We'll write again when I am lonely. Okay? I hope it's okay. I love you, James. All right. This poem, in turn, was written for the mother that raised me. And this is called The Fire in Her Eyes Redefines an Apple. The ritual of fruit begins again in June, when buckets of smiling plums and blistered peaches arrive for her in cars, altering our kitchen into a steaming workshop. Soon, blackened pots boil with our life's winter blood. She quickly buries the dead in a cemetery of sugar where apricots and pears await to be baptized and born again as jam and jelly. Late summer brings chopped cabbages, cucumbers, and ancient spices, all bathed in a sauna of hot vinegar and crushed red peppers. The walls of our kitchen come alive with the sweat of our ancestors who live again through recipes. The dead continue to feed the living with greasy fingers, stuffing our mouths with the sweet cuisine of history. Mama leads us to her garden and motions over a field of greens, their vibrant tongues lapping sunlight like thirsty dogs. She tells us this is a lost art, canning, gardening, and warns that our wives will be useless to our children. Weeping, she presents the bouquet of her hands, fragrant with 40 years of stewed tomatoes, summer squash, sweet corn, and candied yams. She forecasts her death and instructs us to sprinkle her body with salt until her skin appears wild with dandelions. Place her in our biggest pot and simmer to a low gravy. Seal her in a glass jar tomb. store her in a cool, dry place, and wait until the fog of poverty settles in the valley of our ignorance, when there's only rainwater, credited bread, and the memory of meat. This poem is a poem that I love very, very much, even as I'm aware that my mom would probably hate it. And it was written at a very, which you will hear, an extraordinarily difficult time. The only excuse I can give you is as a writer, sometimes I feel obligated to turn towards things that deeply bother me and try to unlock it so that that tension is no longer that effective on me physically or mentally. And this is me, I guess, turning towards the darkness and saying hello. So this is called Pneumonia or Cognac for Water. Her voice tattered as a blues musician who would drink cognac for water. Weeks before tonight, before the prayers, before the flowers and dark car even, I stood over Mama, watching her choke on the plastic air tube the ER docs funneled into her throat. I stood above her, just us in the hallway, my hands dumb and useless. What did she see in my eyes? Happiness. I was happy. This is helping, right? Right? But that was then. Now, in a corroded voice, she sits up in bed, tells everything she overheard the graveyard nurses do during the late shift last night. Boy, what you could get for $5 and a medical supply closet. Hermaphrodites, horny orderlies, hot love affairs. These freaks love helping the sick, but they're sick too, Mama says. Worse than the drug addicts she used to teach at the beauty school. And right then, Mama's old friend Teresa walks into the hospital room. She sits at her bedside, quietly takes out her eyes and polishes them with the napkin she holds tight as a microphone wired to heaven. Mama says, talking over Teresa's tears, speaking now of the man who buried so many of our relatives, tell Thompson, get ready for another funeral. Miss Teresa says, oh, Miss Cagney, stop it. I say, nothing. I look out at the sky, beaten purple-black from the storm, strobe lightning. God is too busy playing paparazzi for any prayers tonight. I'd forgotten how Mama had been so frightened of thunder. God is talking, she used to say. Fill your mouth with prayers for forgiveness. But compared to this pneumonia, to a body coughing itself empty, to a husband's infidelity with death and his orgasm of earthworms, to useless me even. This is nothing. Nothing, do you hear? Teresa and her pity having long since gone, now it's just us again, and God voguing in the background. Now, Mama says, where was I at? Oh, yes, them hermaphrodite nurses, them bad boys, they got working here at night. Let me tell you what happened. Oh, God, how we laughed. I feel like I should also represent my fathers real quick. And here's the first one. Right on, awesome. Actually, I will not represent my fathers. I will actually end with this poem on For the Beach. It's dedicated to a close friend of mine, Steve, but this poem is called Bandon Beach, which is on Highway 101 as you go up from California up into Oregon. We raced a drowsy sunset and storm, barrel rolling over the ocean to return after 10 years to Bandon Beach. Rain pinwheeling before our cars, headlights like sparklers. We park beneath crawling sand dunes, sprouting seagrass, and let the motor idle. We stand near the cliff, wind racing up from the beach 2 stories beneath us at 60, 70 miles per hour. Turn our backs on the firing squad of the ocean. This is ill-advised. And lean into the soft coffin of howling wind. I turn to you, your eyes fevered with happiness, and watch you slide down the staircase to a shoreline boiling milk white. Basalt rock rising from the surf in natural totems, bellowing to the blackening sky like Shakespeare's witches. Everything around us is alive and wails. You run into the black portal of a nearby cave and scream. Here, in the chaos and shrapnel of falling nights, a scream is appropriate shorthand for prayer. I run in after, alighting the cold torch of my cell phone. You rinse peppery sand from your palms beneath the pool of alabaster lights, confessing then how you'd fallen while skipping down beach stairs rendered soft as flour. The cave, its scalloped reptilian walls, the soft palette of its floor is dependable and safe, while outside the sea roars its death song and waves chew the shoreline. We dare one another to leave first, while the tide soldiers forward and night falls hard drunk against the ocean, all while the sea clamors toward us, harvesting screams from both our mouths, leaving us as one leaves a lover, speechless and swallowed by darkness. I thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, James Cagney. That was a very passionate, emotionally direct reading. Wonderful stuff altogether. I really look forward to hearing your answers in the Q&A after. And I should say that James Cagney's latest collection, The Saint of Loneliness, will be published in 2022 by Nomadic Press. And also that where he is, San Francisco, we are twinned, Cork and San Francisco are twin cities. And O'Bale runs an poetry exchange with San Francisco. So James's reading was made possible tonight by that exchange. So thank you to Cork City Council also for making this possible. So now, our final reader for tonight, our very own Victoria Kennefick, from Cork, not too far up the road, but living now in County Kerry. Now in 2015, Victoria had a chapbook published by Southward Editions, and it straight away won the Munster Literature Centre Fool for Poetry Chapbook Competition, and also the Saboteur Award for Best Poetry Pamphlet. So I think in a small little book, Victoria very much heralded herself as a poet of note, and certainly one to look out for. And her first debut collection has taken it a step further. Eat or We Both Starve, which was published this year, 2021, by Carsonet, has been shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize and also the Costa Book Award, which is rare indeed for a first collection. So well done to you, Victoria. We wish you the very best with that. But sure, being nominated is prize enough, I'm sure. And can't wait to hear your poems. And sorry you're not feeling too well. Hope you're feeling much better after all of this. Okay, thank you very much. Take it away.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for such a lovely introduction and what incredible readings. And it's really lovely to be able to see everybody in the audience too. I really wish I was there. I'm having such a lovely time in my poetry life, but my other parts of my life are far more complicated, with small people getting winter vomiting bugs and everyone basically in my household in that particular state. So I have a lot of makeup on to to hide the very gaunt face and the dark circles, but certainly listening to these amazing poems has lifted my spirits, and I send you all my love from dark and cold and rainy Tralee, and I wish I was there, but I hope to make it back to work very, very soon. And I'm honoured to be reading with Gabeba and with James, whose readings were, as I'm sure you'll agree, just incredible. So those of you listening online as well and watching online, I hope that you're all cozy wherever you are and that you all enjoy the poems. I just am from Cork, as the beautiful introduction mentioned, and obviously as a Cork person I have to mention that because that's the most important part of my character, as all Cork people know. And the cover of my book is red and white, which are the colours of Cork, and as my father used to say, the blood and the bandage. And so I thought I'd wear also red and white this evening in honour of Cork. So my reading is going to be quite Cork themed. So I'm going to pick out some of the poems that are set in Cork or reference certain places in Cork, because so many of the collection was written in Cork, at home in Shanagarry, where I grew up, or in Cork City, where I first lived as an adult, age 17, and was wild altogether. So I'm going to start with a poem called Meat. I'm a vegetarian, and I've been a vegetarian since I was about 6 or 7. And it was probably the first big decision I ever made that has affected my life right up until this present moment. So I think it was about control. I guess in this book, I'm interested in exploring the reasons why at such a young age I decided to make quite a dramatic decision back then, because it was before the chickpea had been introduced to the Munster region. So it was just coleslaw and potatoes, really, whenever we went out for dinner for a long time. So this, a lot of people ask why I became a vegetarian. And this, I suppose, is my vegetarian origin story. And it also mentions our beloved English market. Meat. I sucked marrow from bones at dinner. My father's face, a bloody grin of pride. I ate liver in chunks for breakfast, pink and firm, jewels to adorn my insides. I gloried in the feel of flesh, the exertion of the chew. Holding my mother's hand in the English market, I saw them, tiny turkey chandeliers, plucked, bruised purple eyelids, dainty light bulbs. Their smell, fresh as the insides of my mouth. Mother stroked my hair. There. I refused to eat meat, became pillowy, meek. She hid muscle under mashed potato. I tasted its tang in soup. Eat up, my parents said. I could not swallow. My skin goose pimple yellow, doctors drew blood in tiny, regular sips. Teeth turned to glass and shattered in my mouth. All I could taste was blood. I was such a fun child. I was great fun. Everyone loved to play with me. And that kind of relates to the next poem that I'm going to read. As I said, I'm from Shanagarry, which is, beautiful seaside village. And I feel very lucky that I grew up there with such freedom and such beauty all around me. And Ballycotton is an arguably even more picturesque village. Don't ever let anyone from Shanagarry know that I said that. That is across the bay, and they had a Corpus Christi procession every May. So we would, or the first communicants would have the honour of throwing, it was always the girls, throwing the petals in front of the host as it was paraded through the village. And this was like a great honour. So I took this incredibly seriously and very earnestly. So this is for the earnest, serious people out there who struggled a little bit as children. Corpus Christi procession. That May, I collected rose heads to peel off their petals and lay them deep in my new wicker basket lined with linen. Dressed in white, God's little bride, I plucked out each petal and kissed it. The communion wafer is still stuck to my palate. Winding up and down the faithful hills of Ballycotton, I festooned the path for priests to trample all the petals brown. I had been so careful not to bruise them with my lips. Other girls sniggered behind cupped hands, whispered through lacy fingers as my petals rushed to the ground to die. She's really kissing them. The book has a broken sequence in it. And I suppose that basically means that it's a collection of poems that can be read together or separately, but they all speak to each other. They all have a very similar title. So the poems deal with saints and martyrs throughout Catholic history, particularly and in fact exclusively young women who, for various reasons, starved themselves or self-flagellated or in some way engaged in very extreme behaviours, either to control, I suppose, their physical bodies or as a means of rebellion or to be closer to Christ, or indeed any version of these. And I suppose it's interesting bringing a modern interpretation to their activities, for want of a better word, and that's kind of what I tried to do. Hunger strikes Catherine of Siena, 1347 to 1380. My sister taught me how. Oh, Bonaventura, they wanted me to marry him, the slack-jawed widower. I vomited twigs, hid in the convent, wore a widow's habit. The other nuns complained until at 21, I met him. He presented me with a ring fashioned from his skin, told me the sliver of flesh bound us. Wait, he told me, promising it would be special. I levitated, ate only his body. Others did not understand how good it was to kiss his holy prepuce. O Bonaventura, I am a house of sticks. My bones rattle with desire until I lick it. I feel it quiver, alive on my tongue. As I said, I was very much lucky enough to grow up by the sea, and particularly around Ballycotton, there are so many different stories about people who lost their lives at sea. And there's a great respect for the sea, particularly as Ballycotton has the lifeboat. And we were always fascinated as children by the lifeboat and the men who and women who sailed on it and rescued people and putting their lives at risk. My poor uncle, who passed away just before COVID, told me the story, and I'm sure it's true. He said it was true, and I'm going to read it for him and for everyone in Shanagarry tonight. Lighthouse. They say that when they laid his bloated body in her arms, she tried to dry him with her long red hair. Her tears threatened to drown him all over again. They say that when she finally let go, her fingers were puckered. In the morning, her hair was pure white. She never left the corner house again. They say her bones barely held up pale skin, sail-taut against the storm of winds that prevailed night after night. She fell away to nothing. They say she haunted windows, watched the water, her face a perfect sphere. And the crews sailing the rising sea often mistook her for the moon. I went to secondary school in Carrigtwohill, which is just outside Cork City, and some of you may know it. It is unlike the vast majority of convent schools in Ireland that are all girls. It didn't have a twin boys' school, which was very inconvenient for us. We were very isolated, and boys were almost alien. And so we were called actually by the neighbouring school in the next village, the Virgin Megastore, with good reason. So we had to find our entertainment where we could, and I turned to my history books. Obviously, that is what you do. And I fell totally hopelessly in love with most of the gentlemen that were pictured in my history books, because really I had very little else to go on. And also a lot of them are quite attractive. But that is besides the point. I am a dangerously nostalgic person, so I play with that idea a little bit in this. Cork schoolgirl considers the GPO Dublin 2016. I am standing outside the GPO in my school uniform, which isn't ideal. My uniform is the colour of bull's blood. In this year, I am 16, a pleasing symmetry, because I love history. Have I told you that? It's mine, so I carry it in my rucksack. I love all the men of history sacrificing themselves for Ireland, for me, these rebel Jesuses. I put my finger in the building's bullet holes, poke around in its wounds. I wonder if they feel it, those boys. I hope they do. Their blooming faces pressed flat in the pages of my book. I lick the wall as if it were a stamp. It tastes of bones, this smelly city. Of those boys in uniforms, there's bloody too. I put my lips to the pillar. I want to kiss them all. And I do. I kiss all those boys goodbye. And in the spirit of kissing, Cork was also the location of many dates in my life, some successful, some less so, and I'm sure all over the city there are many, I hope, people sitting together now, looking across the table at each other, either saying, oh yes, or oh Lord, how will I get out of this? And so this, I suppose, is a version of all of the dodgy dates in Cork that I had the fortune, the good fortune or the fortune to be part of. Supper. You slosh oil and wine your loose tongue purple. You spill about the ex you courted in Kilmainham Jail Museum. The two of you stuffing envelopes with invitations to an opening. Your mouth went dry from licking. In exchange, this ex let you touch Maud Gonne's dress. You take another sip. I want to eat all the lubricated lettuce in the bowl. It sheens in candlelight. My clothes are getting tight. Was she tiny? I ask. She was, you whisper. I wonder if, for all your licking, you got to finger more intimate garments, still warm. I shift in my chair. Radicchio winks. Nothing on the table but greens, a drained glass, your words decanting. I never said what I mean, so oftentimes I just want to roar at the speaker in this poem and just say, spit it out, say what you want. My father, who was a great Cork man, he was once Corkman of the Year, actually, back in the day, and he worked for Murphy's Brewery, which you probably can nearly smell the hops. I'm assuming it's hops from where you're sitting in Nanonagle Place. And it became a huge part of our lives. And he died, unfortunately, very unfortunately for us all in 2010. And a lot of my pamphlet deals with this loss. And one I'm sure that so many of you have gone through, and we are all here united in loss, really, in our humanity. And what I found, and I'm sure, again, that you can relate to this, that it's been, years. It was 2010. So, it's going on 11 years now. And yet I still see him everywhere, especially on the beach. I'm walking and, thinking of something, and then I just suddenly see somebody and there's something about their walk or something about their energy that for a second, I'm like, oh, Dad, And it's a wonderful feeling, and then it's a dreadful feeling to go through in that microsecond the loss of that person again. And sometimes I like to think that maybe it might just be him just giving me a flash of his presence. Intercession to Saint Anthony. I am on my knees. Find him. Was that his bald head bobbing, a candle flame on my horizon, the scar, a tell, upside down horseshoe with all the luck spilled out? The earth is eating my family up. It practices sucking at the soles of my shoes. I can't resist pressing my fingers into its soil, smearing muck on my face, war paint. But I'm a loser. My father died when I wasn't looking. Careless. I've mislaid my keys again. I buzz around a stupid blue bottle bouncing off walls. Where are they? Where is he? I hit my head on a shelf. I swear I have left my body. Then you let me see, Saint Anthony. I'm broke from you, and now a gift given back. A missing leopard print sock, the lost gold earring, my keys, and now his clear white bones licked clean, burning the ground. I get up, the scar dissolved, the candle quenched. There he is. I'm just going to read two more. The next one is because I love Audrey Hepburn and all things Audrey Hepburn, and particularly having watched Roman Holiday with my mom and dad way past my bedtime at a very early age was very formative for me, and also contributed to my lifelong crush on Gregory Peck, who has to be the most gorgeous man ever, bar my husband, of course. So I think partly my obsession with Audrey Hepburn may have to do with the fact that she got to run around Rome with Gregory Peck, which seems like a rather delicious prospect. Prayer to Audrey Hepburn. Oh, blessed Audrey of the feline eye flick, jutting bones, slim-hipped androgyny of wartime rationing, I've missed your nightly visitations. I summoned you, carefully cutting around your monochrome face in mother's fashion magazines, pointing the scissors away from myself as I had been taught, your name an incantation on my lips. I stuck those pieces of you to my pink walls with rolled up sellotape and waited. You came, sheathed in black with the posture of a reed. Hypnotized, I prayed to you for grace that I could sew my mouth closed like a doll, be a sculpture made of skin. Years later, and there's a person growing in my uterus, my body a building site. I intercede to you again, snip around your slinky silhouette. In scissors blades, I see myself 13 when you fall out of the shadows. Oh, Audrey, can't stay, you hiss. You stare at me with saucer eyes. I am hungry, you say, hungry like you. I can't help but laugh. I am too big to be a woman. You lean over the bed. I am conscious of my pudgy belly, my rat's nest hair, but you take my face in your hands, kiss me hard, pushing your gorgeous tongue across the length of mine. Afterwards, our seams popping, we shriek with laughter. And this last poem is published in a new journal online, a relatively new journal called Bad Lilies, and all of the issues are available for free online, and they just have a really lovely collection of issues and really engaging and fun and disturbing and brilliant poems. And I was really lucky. They published 2 of mine in their last issue. And I'm going to read this one because it is set in the Boole Lecture Theatre in UCC. And I went to UCC when I was 17 and stayed there for quite a long time. I really didn't want to leave. So this is for that period, for the English Literature Society, for my brilliant lecturers, for my amazing experiences, for all the people I kissed and didn't kiss, and just for what an incredible institution it is. And it really, I suppose, allowed me to explore my writerly self in very formal and very informal ways. So I'm always going to be grateful for that. Plunder. In the lecture theatre, I sit in the dark. There will be slides about Visigoths. You stroll in. Odour of unwashed socks and links from your thick sweater, roomy and woolly with sleeves that go way past your hands. You sit in front of me. My pupils expand. You have a cold, your wee face pale, your concave chest wheezing. You need a tissue, a couple of tissues, a full, glorious box. But you don't have any, you messy thing. You sneeze, and I wish I knew your name. I mumble, God bless you, hope you'll hear. You run your sweet nose over a loose cuff. I want to tug the folded tissue from my bra, tap you on your bony shoulder, my warm breath on your nape. And as the spoils of Visigoth pillage project on screen in Bool 1, I'll blow your nose. That has a very different meaning now in COVID times, but I'll leave it there. Thank you so much to Paul and to everybody at O'Vale, our brilliant compere who introduced us so beautifully and sensitively, and to all of you listening online and in real life, and to my brilliant fellow readers. It's really been a fantastic night. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us. That was fantastic. It was vivid, vivacious, fun. Thank you. You strike me as somebody who's really in their own skin. Yeah, you don't come across that very often, and it's really lovely to behold. Thank you, Victoria. So now we have just 2 questions, and they're the same questions for each of you. And the first one relates to the idea of art as activism. I recently read an article in The Guardian by Ben Oakley, and he thinks that to be an artist in the time that we live in now, we have a duty of care to kind of address the crisis that we're all facing. And he states, artists must confront the climate crisis. We must write as if those are the last days, are the last days. So I'd just like to ask, how does that statement sit with you as an artist? And if you wouldn't mind going first, Victoria, that would be great. Thank you.
It is a massive challenge, but I think it's really the only one. I think, as always, the political is personal. And I think as artists and as poets, whether you're a visual artist or an actor or a writer of any kind, your job is really to observe and to try and in somehow encapsulate what's happening in front of you, and to try and be as honest and clear with yourself, I think more than anyone. And then that clarity is hopefully translated into the work and then will reach people. And I suppose I've noted very much in the new poems that I'm working on, very much that leaking into the sorrow, the mourning, the sense, the weight of responsibility that we must all feel, and that we all have to take on for what we're doing to our planet. And I think it's essential that artists write about it. And I think it's unavoidable. And even when they're not writing about it, they're writing about it, because in a sense, that's part of our communal denial, our distraction, that we're so good at, avoiding it. And I think so much with COVID, that COVID is, this terrible, dreadful pandemic, but behind it is the gaping black hole of what is coming next. And fun times on a Friday evening here in O'Vale. But I think it's something, especially I think writing about my daughter, which I've started to, it's just unavoidable, the sense of guilt and of sorrow and fear about what's going to happen. So I think it's I'm really interested to hear what the other two readers have to say, because I think it's really a call to arms, that article, and I would very much concur.
James Cagney, would you like to?
Sure, I just agree, and also want to say that that all writing to me is responsive writing to a crisis. There are beautiful and valuable poems about flowers, about rabbits in the field or whatnot, but I feel like the skills we're given as writers is the skill of paying attention and the skill of responding to a crisis, to an event, to a realization. And not all poetry should be about comforting the reader or the listener. A lot of poetry should very well be like an alarm of some kind. A lot of the writing that I did in my book, for example, was trying to unpack the uncertainty and questions I had just about my own identity. I had to, as I mentioned earlier, acknowledge that there is darkness, and I had to somehow address it and to go in there and to figure out what that is, because so many people can't do that. So many people won't do that if for not being artists themselves, or just not knowing where to start, or just being quite frankly afraid. And I feel like a lot of what all of us do as artists, whether that's a poet or as a visual artist or filmmaker or whatever, is to somehow acknowledge the courage to go in and start the conversations that are hard, that are difficult, and that are troubling. And there is no more troubling crisis going on than what we have with our climate. And oddly, I think a lot of people think that the climate crisis is a bit of a joke, or is it a bit of a thing for people in the future to deal with. But no, all of us need to pick up our arms and weapons and do something to make awareness, to expand awareness, to make us all conscientious of what's going on, and to hopefully make some changes within ourselves and our communities.
Thank you, James. It absolutely it starts with ourselves for sure, and then we can send it out there. So Gabeba, if you wouldn't mind answering.
Sure. I started to write poetry later than I studied. I was 30 when I took that evening class in poetry I mentioned. And my desire for achieving something in poetry always outpaced my skills. So I'm delighted to hear about James and Victoria's desire to use their skills. I, on the other hand, was always doubtful of my skills, especially in grappling with important ethical, philosophical questions. And I'd write what I think of as political poems, and they were just disastrous. They probably didn't help the causes I was trying to advance. So for me, the way to actually make this kind of impact, which I've wanted to since 1999, is to go back to the observable, tell what you see, write what you see. And it turns out there was a lot that I was overlooking, neglecting, abandoning. And once I found that poetry made me more honest, and it made me attentive to the small things, such as the way my grandmother's frugality was actually a complete lesson plan on how I should live. How she didn't waste water, not a single drop of water. How that taught me that in 2017, when I was living in Cape Town, we had a drought that almost led to no water for our city, which is the first time a major world city would have run out of water. We had to collect water from springs under the guise of, under the eyes of soldiers, because it was such a precious resource. My grandmother, who lived during the Depression and who lived during rations in World War II, who never wasted a single thing, not a piece of cotton, not a piece of fabric, not anything to eat, not a drop of water, was teaching us all the time how to live. And I think how to live, how do we live in the face of desperate times, which have been lived before. Times of pandemic have been lived before, times of war have been lived before. times of devastation have been lived before. And to me, paying attention to those things and writing honestly about them was something that poetry taught me, and that I think poetry achieves in transforming how we live. And that is what we really have to do. We have to, as James says, people think it's about the future or they think it's a joke. But actually, nature is no longer in the comfortable background for us. We've done enough damage that we actually have to look at it directly. And how do we live now? I think for me, poetry does that work of careful, close observation and conveys it, is going to teach us how to live.
Thank you, Gabeba. That was a very personal answer and very lovely. And you actually touched on a few things earlier on in your response that will take me to my next question. And so each of you are award-winning poets, right? And I know the journey to get there can't have been easy. You must have stumbled along the way and had to pick yourself up a few times, as we all do. But I'd like to know or ask, please, if you could speak to a moment where something or someone made all the difference and shone a little light at a time when you really needed it. Would you mind speaking to that? And if we could start with James, please. Thank you.
And to be clear, that speaking to the moment and made the difference to what?
To a time in your journey as a writer where you might have felt like you were floundering or doubting yourself.
I'm thinking about that. A turning point in maybe there's probably several, but all roads really lead towards being encouraged and being heard by people in sort of like in your own community. As a writer, it's it's like we live and work so much in isolation and concentrate so much on trying to get things right for ourselves or our own story, and just kind of producing material that it's hard to actually know if you are being heard, if you're making an impact, if anyone genuinely responds and cares to the sort of music that you discover and come up with in the poetry and the writing and whatever it is that you do. And I guess one of the major things for me was a little bit over 15 years ago, was getting into a writers group with 3 women who were already teachers and professors, who were already sort of published poets and performers. And in a strange way, I earned a seat in there just because of my ability to write, not because of any awards or anything that I'd been given. I'd been given nothing and had nothing. I just had poems and writing that I could do. And at some point, all of the people in that group nudged me to join a organization out of New York called Cagney, which is a African American poetry organization that does workshops every year. And that group of writers from my little writers group worked together to motivate me to trust myself and my own voice. That they ended up seeing and stamping what I was doing as somehow valuable. And I guess what I'm ultimately saying is for me, and I guess my experience is that it's important to just stay honest with the work, to stay honest with what it is that you are doing and interested in. And somehow in that honesty and in that concentration, you are seen and heard, and you are validated. And I have been incredibly surprised at responses that I've gotten from people I did not even know about with the work that I was doing and attempting to do. So yeah, I guess it's a direct answer. It's the group of people that were very supportive in my writers group, and a lot of random people out of the community who just would grab me after readings and say that those words that I chose to do had meaning and resonated for them. So, you know, it's like we do this writing for ourselves and our spirit and for what discomforts us, but somehow these words also speak for and trigger and meet other people in the world. And those people who hear us, this is who we are doing this work for, to kind of let them know that they are not alone, and that whatever my unique story is also speaks for and addresses them somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, James.
You have to talk right into it. People can't hear you.
Okay. Thank you, James. I have to like kiss the microphone, otherwise people won't hear me. So there we go. That was a lovely answer. Cheers. Can Gabeba Baderoon please take?
Yes, I experienced a concussion 3 years ago, and I effectively, my brain, I feel, has emptied itself of creativity. And my book has just been published this year, but it was a republication of that Kwela book that you mentioned. So I haven't written for all of that time. And it's a very devastating thing, which I try not to think about too much, because, you know, otherwise I might have to face what that actually says. But at the beginning of June, I took part again in an evening class for poets. And these were offered to the community broadly, not for students of writing or anything like that, which just, so it was a very hospitable space, and I felt very anonymous and very safe within that space. And I did the exercises and the homework, the sort of magical old exercises like free writing and choosing a word that has emerged, and all of those things that I know about and probably have done, but that I had no faith in, because this thing had happened to my brain. And just that, I don't know what it was. It was a little magical and passed very quickly, but I was able to write something, and out of maybe a page or so, there was one word. It was like a sliver of something, and it was enough to perhaps reassure me that, you know, the concussion is not just a path that leads away, but there might be ways of coming back. And for that teacher who taught that writing class, and to the other students who were there were only 4 of us, I am so infinitely grateful. And it's hopefully something that will continue, and I have to see how to make magic happen more often, I suppose.
I was a very honest and my jaw kind of dropped, very honest answer. I wish you all the magic and all the safe spaces that you need. Yeah, I would say trust your heart. It's not all about the brain, and certainly not with you. I think it's so apparent. Thank you. So Victoria, you might take us away with your answer. Thank you.
It's such a complicated question in many ways, because I think there are so many moments along your path to whatever you're doing where you doubt yourself. I think my whole path in poetry was doubting myself as being a strange, earnest, overly sensitive child who didn't like sports, and he was just a bit overwhelmed by everything. And I think more than anything, the fact that my family, and particularly my younger sister, saw me and respected my interest and listened to me read such terrible poems that were so long. And she would just always say, that needs to be cut, that needs to be cut, like when we were very, very young. And I think I've met so many different versions of that. You know, teachers at school that were so encouraging, like incredibly supportive. When you kind of feel lost, you know, in a big bustling school and you mightn't fit in with, you think anyway, with the kind of maybe ethos of it or whatever. And there's always somebody, if you are willing to put out what it is you love, there's always somebody who'll see it and recognize it. And there might be fallow periods, but I think those moments of recognition from my family, from my teachers, from my husband, from my peers, you know, going to creative writing classes, as Gabeba said, like, and in fact that James mentioned too, huge, you know, that you actually kind of go, well, I'm going to seek out my mentors and I'm going to seek out the people who are going to help me because I really want to do this and I really like believe I can, and it gives my life meaning. It's the only thing I can do, actually. And I think that is really, in essence, you know, every little interaction you have keeps you going. Even, you know, this wonderful event tonight is going to keep me going now through the next couple of weeks. And so it's a really, you know, about being honest, as I think has been maybe the theme of this whole evening. So, yeah, everybody, you guys, all of you guys keeping me going.
Well, I have to start that all again and get closer to the mic. So I just saying thank you so much. That absolutely, I'm with you 100% in what you say. To be, yeah, we're all here for each other, so we should just keep on keeping on. And yeah, I look forward to all the poems that are going to come from you guys. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to say good night and good day, I suppose, to Gabeba and to James. Yeah, so big round of applause, everybody, for Victoria Kennefick, Gabeba Baderoon, and James. I really wish we could all go for a pint together now, so
True.
for you. Right. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Thank you.